Welcome to another episode of the Endurance Matters podcast. I'm your host, Justin Metzler, and today in studio I have Hannah Schell. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you coming on. It's been a busy 24 hours flying in last night, yes. 1 a.m., but yeah, making the time for this, we really appreciate it. But I start off the podcast with an icebreaker, hard-hitting question. My question for you today is, what is worst, double headwind or double flat tire?
Probably a double flat tire. Yeah.
Unrepairable, kind of.
It's kind of unrepairable. Like, unless it seals, most people aren't carrying two tubes with them.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can maybe stop in hygiene or something and maybe get a little bit of a pump to get you home, but I don't know. Double flat's pretty tough.
Yeah.
Do you even get flat tires now?
Rarely, actually. Yeah.
Me too. Yeah. Well, cool. I feel like I see you out on the road, like, all the time riding. You're noticeable in your feed helmet. I notice all the feed athletes, and I am always in the zone time trialing right away. But we've got a mutual sponsor in Shimano, and the athlete rep Meredith said you'd be a great guest. So excited to have you on the show today.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Yeah, thank you for having me.
For sure. Well, why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about who you are for those that don't know. On the show we interview athletes, in all endurance sports. So mostly triathletes, a lot of professional runners, and we've had Alexi Vermeulen on as a professional cyclist. So I'm really interested in sports outside of triathlon and running, including gravel cycling. So can you explain a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah. So my name is Hannah Schell. I do consider myself predominantly a gravel cyclist, but starting in 2021, I began competing in more endurance mountain bike races as well. So I switched to off-road in 2020. I started my career racing on the road, predominantly criteriums. Since switching to dirt, I've just kind of fallen in love with the longer format of racing. I like the more privateer style approach in the gravel world. I think it's just a little bit easier for someone like me that I also have a full-time job and I'm married, a little bit older. So being on the road team started to get to the point where I was like, I want to book my own travel and stay at my own place. That's kind of been my focus. I've competed twice in the Grand Prix, and this year I'm in the Wild Card series. So hopefully we'll earn a spot after Unbound. Right now, focused on getting ready for Unbound.
Cool. Yeah, that's coming up. When's Unbound?
It's May 31st.
Okay,
yeah.
Coming up for sure. So can you tell us a little bit about how you got into cycling in the first place, maybe a little bit about your upbringing?
Yeah, for sure. So I was a dancer in high school, which is probably a fairly unique entry into endurance sports. But I competed in show choir, I grew up in Iowa. And in the Midwest, show choir is a really big deal. And if you're not familiar with it, it's kind of like Glee Club, if you have watched that series. After my senior year of high school, I wasn't continuing on with dance. And so I wanted something to stay fit in college and started running, which very quickly led to a running injury. And by the time I graduated from college, I was literally on crutches at graduation because I had a torn labrum and was quite a long recovery from that. So I was pretty sad to not be running anymore. And my dad has been a cyclist his whole life, so he gave me one of his old bikes. And I had moved to St. Louis for my first job, met a triathlete that I worked with, actually, and she invited me to a criterium where I got third. And I was like, oh, this is super cool. I had never envisioned that I would be good enough at any sports to be placing on the podium. So that it was kind of full on after that. I really jumped headfirst into it. And like I said, started racing criteriums on the road. I raced for Papa John's and for DNA, and then switched to dirt in 2020.
Cool. Could you tell when you switched over to running that there was some endurance sport talent in there, or was it not until you hopped on the bike that you realized that was kind of a place where you were going to succeed?
I think I could tell. I was not, when I switched to running, I was not following a formal training program. I actually just had the Nike app, which I don't know what this looks like today because I don't run at all anymore, but it would kind of suggest workouts for you.
Okay. AI before AI or something?
I mean, I'm sure it was not AI. I'm sure it was very if you said you were training for a half marathon, it would just give you kind of a pre-built program. But I was always comparing myself to my roommate, who was also starting to get into running, and I knew I was a lot faster than her. And so I was like, okay, maybe I have some like natural skill here.
Nice. Yeah, that's a pretty good entry,
Yeah.
level comparison straight away. Where are you from in Iowa?
I'm from Des Moines.
Okay, cool. I went to
Yeah.
University of Iowa, so Iowa City.
Did you?
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah, Midwest guy. I grew up in Illinois, and then I went there for college.
Okay, we're at in Illinois.
Glenview?
I don't know where that is.
Yeah, anyways, it's like Chicago suburbs.
Nice.
Well, cool. I want to talk a little bit more about, okay, so you get into road cycling, you get into the crit series. Like, what was that whole world like? Was it your full-time gig at the time? Were you still working in St. Louis? What was sort of like the road scene?
Yeah, so I worked full-time until 2019. And I worked for the Federal Reserve, so it was a fairly intense, like 40 hours a week in the office job. It was very hard to balance. In 2018 was kind of my first year racing for like an elite team where there were contracts involved and race schedules. And it was really hard to balance the team's requirements along with work. I ended up taking a lot of like unpaid leave just to make things work. And in terms of like the environment on the road itself, like road cycling it's funny because gravel is getting so competitive now, but road cycling is competitive in a different way. There's so much pressure to win, and that really was wearing on me by 2019. I was kind of like, so I had quit my job. I was racing for DNA, which is a fabulous team, fabulous program, but there's always the pressure to win on the road side. And it was really taking the fun out of it.
Yeah. How does that process work? Do you just get results and move your way through the ranks, and someone like DNA picks you up and says, hey, we're going to give you this contract. We need you to, execute on these sort of results or deliverables? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. So when I started, there were 4 categories with USA Cycling for women. So you start as a Cat 4, and then as you win or place well enough in races with enough entrants, you earn points. And then those points move you up through the categories. So what's crazy for women, and this still exists today, is when you go from a category 3 to a category 2, you go from like purely amateur racing to racing with professionals. So when I moved up from a 3 to a 2, and I did this really fast, like I did this in like 4 months, which was a mistake. But I was, eager to move up. I went to Tulsa Tough as my first race as a 2, and that was terrifying. I didn't finish the first day because there were just so many crashes around me. I had no idea like how to position within the field. And I remember calling my coach and being like, I cannot do this. Like, this is crazy. But I continued to work at it. And I think that once you reach a category 2, that's when you're jumping in with like the actual pro teams. And that's where you start to get opportunities to draw attention to yourself in terms of how you're racing, how you're positioning, decisions that you're making. And so that was really my focus in 2017. I was on a local domestic elite team, and we had kind of like a mix of athletes that were older and like just wanted to be able to jump into the professional races, but weren't really looking to get picked up by a team. And then younger athletes that wanted to get picked up to a bigger team. And so we would go to the races and we would have goals of just like being aggressive in the race or like trying to help each other in the sprint finish, do like small lead outs, just things to try to get our names on the map. And I think we actually did a pretty good job of that. I guest rode for IS Corp halfway through that year. And so at the time that was Sam and Sky Schneider, and they were winning everything. So it was a really cool opportunity. And I learned a lot about racing. And then when it came time for contract negotiation in September, I did have kind of multiple teams that I was speaking with. But the one that was most appealing to me was Papa John's, because they had the budget to fly the team members in and out of each race. And for me, I'm like, I can't spend time being in a team van.
Sure.
So, yeah, that's like, there's more that goes into it. There's like anything else. There's networking, and there's like, I would always tell new riders that like you're always being interviewed, whether you're at the airport or whether you're just like getting ready for the race in the field. Like the other riders are constantly assessing you for like, do we want her as a teammate? Like, is she someone that's going to fit in with the culture of our squad? So I think that's like a big part of road cycling, is just being aware that the eyes are on you, whether you know it, if you're a strong rider, and making sure that you are kind of presenting yourself in a good way.
Sure. Is there a tipping point for you there where it just becomes too much, too high pressure, and you need to change?
Yes. So DNA was like a very professional team. And they had I'm trying to think, I think we had 12 team members. And so when you're going to races, a lot of times you can only race 6. So it's like how you're performing at the early season races determines the roster for the big races for the rest of the year. And I had a good early season, so then I was on the roster for like Tulsa Tough. But we didn't have a very good performance at Tulsa, and having those meetings with the team where there was a lot of pressure applied to each and every one of us of like, you messed this up. This was wrong. And for me, I was just like, man, like this is a really hard environment. And I just didn't thrive in it. I think a lot of riders do, but for me, I just didn't.
Sure. Do you think that what was the decision to shift over to stay in cycling? Was it because you hadn't been in the sport that long and you still felt like there was a lot of untapped potential? Did you see other riders at the time going through a similar scenario and just quitting cycling altogether?
Well, I met my husband, Jake, in 2019, and he had started a privateer criterium racing program. And so I was watching what he was doing, and I was like, man, this looks fun. Like, he just has his own sponsors. He picks his own schedule. He goes to races, and he meets his own goals, but he's also providing a return for his sponsors through social media. And so to me, that was really interesting, and that was kind of a new model at the time. Like, Colin Strickland was doing it.
Sure.
So Jake had just started doing it. Maybe Amity Rockwell. And Allison Tetrick, but like there were not very many people that were following that privateer model. And so when I decided not to return to DNA in 2020, Jake started speaking to his sponsors and asking if they would like to have like both a male and a female representing the brand. And for the most part, we had a really positive response. And so that really kind of kept me in the sport. But then as we began to discuss with these sponsors, like, hey, what do you guys want from us this year? What can we provide for you? They all said, we just want you guys to do some gravel racing. And so we were on Giant at the time. And so we got gravel bikes from them and started doing, there weren't any races in 2020, but we just started doing a lot of the like Strava races around Boulder, trying different gravel style things. And I just really enjoyed it. Like the longer format of racing seemed to work really well for me.
Yeah, cool. Was there enough meat on the bone at the time through that privateer system straight away for you to still not have a quote unquote real job? Or did you have to, when you left that professional cycling world, go back to kind of like corporate life or whatever?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so I did start working again full time, and I started consulting. So it was a lot easier to balance than what I had before because my consulting job is 100% remote. And through that time, so I started working in consulting in late 2019 and continued through 2022. And then I went full-time racing again because we were starting to bring in more sponsor income. And with the Grand Prix, obviously, there was like a new level of professionalism in the sport. And I kind of found out that I didn't like it this time. Like I preferred having something outside of racing that kept me a little bit more balanced, where I had goals that were less dependent on like the luck of the draw. So I still work full time. I say full time, but my job is super flexible. They kind of allow me to like take time off when I need to for racing and training, and I'm hourly. So anytime that I take, obviously I'm not paid for that, so I don't have vacation or anything, but it's a really, really good structure, and I'm really grateful for it.
Yeah, that's amazing. I feel very similarly, and I feel like the professional athlete sort of is always at a bit of an internal war with that because the other athletes in the space want you to believe as though you need to be like eat, sleep, train. But there are personalities out there, kind of like myself, where I feel as though if I'm just so focused on eat, sleep, train, like it becomes too much for me, and I need like outlets like the podcast here and my coaching business or whatever that like help me diversify and get my mind out of like just thinking about myself 24/7. So it's like refreshing to hear athletes come in and say that they feel similarly in that regard. And I'm curious as well, because right now, I think, 2020 and beyond, I think the model for the professional athlete has changed so much, and it's so much more about social media and about those, the deliverables in addition to just going to the races. Is that something that you like and you sort of like immerse yourself in, or do you just want to work with brands you want to work with and your job pays, keeps the lights on and you just want to go ride?
So it's really a mix. Like without our sponsors, we couldn't afford to race at the level that we do. So our sponsors help us with like our travel expenses. They help cover the gap when I'm taking a week off to go to a race, because obviously I'm losing that income from my job. And then we prefer to have social media for our sponsors because I think that's a constant. That's something that we can control, and we can make sure that they're benefiting from the partnership regardless of how we're performing in any given year. So like in 2023, for example, I started struggling with a lot of iron issues. And it's been a long comeback from that until this year that I've really started to feel back to myself. So I was really grateful for social media in that time because I was like, I'm not going to be on any podiums this year. I'm still going to be able to do events, and I'm still going to be able to talk about like training and talk about this process. But without social media, I wouldn't have been able to like continue providing that exposure for the brands I work with. So I view it as a positive.
Yeah, 100%. I view it as a positive thing as well. And I think it's also part of just what we all sign up for as professional athletes in 2025. It's just sort of part of what it is. Sponsor of today's episode, Precision Fuel and Hydration. These guys have been an amazing partner for the show, and it's really a product that I use every single day in my training to help me go faster, feel better. So in today's day and age, we all know high carb is sort of the thing. And so previously I've spoken about how much I like the chews, and I'm still munching on those pretty much every single day in training, but I've really been getting into the PF90 gels. That's been a really big value add for me to have 3 gels in one. And I feel like sometimes I'll just take that entire gel all at once or go half and half. It just allows me to get a little bit more carbohydrate and sort of just bump everything up and feel a little bit better in training. So if you want to try that for yourself, head on over to pfnh.com and use code BigMetz2025 for 15% off. I think in addition, I guess when you're reaching out to new brands and saying, hey, this is who I am, what is your pitch to them?
Well, I usually sell myself as a relatable athlete because I would say that I'm not like someone that has this tremendous natural ability. Like I do have to work really hard. I am very meticulous about my training and about my nutrition and how I approach these events. And I'm still like doing everything that I'm doing. Like at Sea Otter, I finished 31st and had my best normalized power ever for 6 hours. And so it's like I think a lot of women are experiencing that too. Where we're like the fastest we've ever been, but our placing is exactly the same. So
yeah, you need to find other avenues to maybe differentiate yourself from the rest of the pack, which is not always easy. And it's interesting to hear your perspective as a cyclist say that. I have runners coming in saying the exact same thing. Triathletes are feeling the exact same way. Is there anything in gravel cycling that you can pinpoint right now that's sort of like, made this ascension happen in terms of the speed and the pace?
I mean, I think that women's racing across the board is growing. And I think the Tour de France Femme has helped a lot with that because now we're seeing women at the very top level of the sport finally get the coverage and recognition that they deserve. I'm not saying that it's perfect. There's definitely, of course, still room to improve. But just the existence of that race and the coverage of it, I have seen the sport improve at all levels. I also think that the Lifetime Grand Prix for gravel specifically has really grown the sport in the U.S. And I know that a lot of people, and myself included, have criticized some of the decisions that Lifetime has made. I think that every decision they make is with a positive intention. And whether the outcomes of that are always as they intended it to be, it's really hard when you're the first people doing something in a space. But yeah, I think that the Grand Prix has grown the sport tremendously. I think that also as Lifetime has given women their own race and been able to cover that race specifically, it's just drawn more attention to the sport. And then with the decline of road racing in the US, if you are an athlete that wants to get the experience of racing at the highest level, gravel is probably your best option right now.
Sure. Why do you think so many people are gravitating towards gravel? Like, why is road cycling decreasing in popularity and gravel cycling popping off so much?
Well, I mean, one would just be from the events that are available. I know that a lot of road events have died off throughout the years. Like if I look at what my schedule was when I was road racing, most of those events don't exist anymore. It was like Joe Martin and the Colorado Classic, and like they're gone now. So gravel events are just easier to put on. I also think that there's like no structure right now in gravel racing. There's starting to become like you need to apply to be in the elite field for this race. But I can't remember who I was talking to the other day that was like, athletes that don't really know what their ability is can jump into these races and can finish in the top 10. And in road racing, as we discussed at the beginning, that wasn't possible. Like you did have to go through more of a category structure, and that, I think it is important for safety. I also think that it does kind of discourage some people from getting into the sport.
Sure. And why do you think the brands are loving gravel so much? Is it simply because that's their only option in American cycling right now? Or is there something that they're seeing in terms of influence that they find really attractive?
So what I love about gravel is that it didn't start as a professional sport. Gravel started as a grassroots, like your everyday person was doing it, and maybe some professionals were, but it was really started with the everyday, like just your average Joe cyclist. And because of that, when professionals started to get into the field, there was already this huge fan base for gravel, and a way to connect with the people that are actually like supporting this sport differently than in any other type of race. Because now as a professional, well, at least when I started as a professional, if I'm going and lining up with the Cervelo Aspero, there's thousands of amateurs around me that are seeing like, oh, she, is racing at the front of the race and this is the bike that she's on. So I think that something that is really important to like attribute as a gravel cyclist is that we are not responsible for the growth of this sport. Like it started with the average Joe, and they're the reason that gravel is what it is today. I also think that the structure of sponsorship in gravel, how it's predominantly privateer as opposed to team, works a lot better for brands. The ones that I've spoken to prefer the ability to have the relationship with the athlete directly, because when you're on a team, you're kind of told what equipment you're riding. And you might genuinely love that equipment, but it's still hard for the brand to connect with you personally. Whereas like for Jake and I, every single one of our sponsors is a brand that we genuinely believe is the best product for us.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. And there's so many parallels between the gravel world and the triathlon world.
Yes.
Because as triathletes, we're privateer athletes. There's very few triathlon teams out there where you're contracted to ride a certain product. So all of our relationships, my wife Jeannie and I, like same thing, where we just have personal relationships with the marketing rep, and we can tell them what we need, what we like, what they can come to us and tell us exactly what they need from us. And I think that's really huge. And additionally, it's the same structure in the sense of like, we're out there racing at the front of the race and the amateurs follow behind us and they're doing the exact same thing. And I think there's so much power and value in that. And if you look at the Tour de France or even a criterium race, like you have spectators, but the fan base isn't there. It sometimes isn't there. Oftentimes it's not at the same volume. Whereas like if we have this shared experience as one amateur and pro, like those people become fans because we have this shared experience. So it's cool, and I just see those parallels happening. One thing that you did mention was like this grassroots feel. A lot of people talk about the spirit of gravel. Now with the injection of all this money and the Lifetime Grand Prix, and there is more professionalism coming into the sport. Like, what are you seeing? Is there a shift? Is it still grassroots? Is there still spirit around it?
Yes, I think there is. And I think that as professionals, we should continue to support the local and independent events. Because those are the ones that are really keeping the spirit of gravel alive. So like the Lifetime events are awesome. And I think that they're inspiring to everyone, whether you're a professional or whether you're like an average cyclist. You're seeing these events with this like amazing live coverage, and they're super challenging. They're kind of famous with all their different aspects. And so those are great for inspiration. But in terms of like where the sport is really staying alive, I do think it is more like the local grassroots races where there's less rules, there's less, like it's not as hard or expensive to get into these events, and you can just go and not have the pressure of like, oh, I'm trying to ride 200 miles. You're at your local hometown race and you're discovering that gravel roads are really fun to ride on. And it's also cool that you can just jump into an event and be a part of this community.
Yeah, yeah, very cool. Where do those local grassroots events fit in for someone like yourself or a professional cyclist with the existence of the Lifetime Grand Prix, where like that seems to be the North Star and like the gold standard of professional racing right now?
Yeah, I think that they're great training stimulus. So this weekend I'm going to Cotuit or Colorado to Utah. And so that's a 125-mile race. It starts in Fruita. And for me, that's like, this is a great opportunity to go out and test my fitness, test my equipment, test my race strategy leading into Unbound. And then there are independent events that have like really big prize purses. So Gravel Worlds, for example, like I'm a part of the promoter team there, just as a disclosure, but like we have a $100,000 prize purse for the professional field, but we're still a local independent race. So I think that you can both find races that are like, hey, this is kind of a training event where I'm going to support the community and also just like test some stuff out. And then there are other races where you can go and target it as an event that you really want to win. It can be an A race. And a lot of times, like SBT, for example, is still an independent race. So those ones are cool to see that they're still as big of a priority on the pros' schedules. And I hope they stay that way.
Do you envision a world where Lifetime scoops those up and folds them into the Grand Prix and the Grand Prix becomes 15 races?
No, I don't think that those races in particular would ever sell to Lifetime. And I don't know that Lifetime would want to buy them. Like, I don't know what the logistics of that are. Not that they're not all friends. I think everyone in this world is like supportive of each other. But yeah, I think that what would be more likely is that a third party like might try to bring some of these races together into like a gravel omnium, like Gravel Earth Series.
Sure.
I don't know if you're familiar with that, but so Gravel Worlds is a part of Gravel Earth Series now. Still an independent race, but if you want to race in a series format, you have the opportunity to do so.
Sure. Is there competitiveness, at the top between the people who run Lifetime Grand Prix and maybe the individual race runners, where they're all competing for a piece of people's attention? People can only race so many times a year, and if you're traveling across the country, like people's budgets are only so big. So like in triathlon, for example, Ironman has a pretty strong hold on the marketplace in North America, and there have been brands that have come in and tried to compete, but there's just so many races, Ironman races, that people just end up choosing those. And so is there a world where Lifetime says, okay, we're going to put on 20 races, and then these other races that are independent maybe fall away?
I haven't asked this question to Lifetime in a few years, but the last time I asked, they're actually losing money on most of their races, especially the smaller ones. So I would be surprised if Lifetime expanded more into events. I think that probably their focus is on building up the ones that they have now. And I think that's a good strategy, because if you look at the Grand Prix, it's like 6 events. And obviously they have more than that. But building those up, they're well spaced throughout the calendar. I think that's a good approach for them. And then for the other races, like, of course there's a competition there, but there's also like a courtesy between events of like, hey, like we're not going to schedule something on the same date as your event, because A, that would be bad for the person that's moving because they're not going to get as many attendees. But like, no one wants to be pitted against each other like that.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting thing in the space. I'm curious for you as a racer, like how motivated are you to race in the Grand Prix versus these other races? And how valuable is it for you and your brand to place in a non-Grand Prix event versus maybe get a 10th in a Grand Prix race?
That's a really good question. I think the Grand Prix is really valuable. I think that there is a lot of really great marketing around it, and I would have to like credit that to Lifetime. The brands that we work with are usually at the Grand Prix races. Like they're going to be at the expo, and those are their big activations. And so for them, they're like, hey, whether you're in the Grand Prix or not, like we want you at these events. So for me, I'm like, well, if I'm going to be at the events anyways, I want to be a part of the series that's tied to them. And I also think that there's just like a level of prestige associated with the Grand Prix that like everyone wants to be able to say they're one of the I think it'll be 25 cyclists this year that's a part of the series. So that's a big part of it. But that being said, like winning races that are not on the Grand Prix can be just as big of a deal to brands, especially if there's a really deep field. Having a result at those events, I think that matters.
Yeah, I think winning at the end of the day is marketable,
yes,
regardless
absolutely.
of where it comes from. And so I think, like there's definitely a balance there, and maybe carving out a season calendar that sets you up to be able to be in as many Grand Prix races as you possibly can, but also still maybe get those, Instagram worthy shots that's like, proves your credibility of being a winner,
Yeah, for sure.
I want to talk a little bit more about your training and maybe how you balance your, you said you have a lot of flexibility, but I'm curious about what your training looks like in addition to working full time. So can you elaborate a little bit just generally in terms of maybe do you have a coach right now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Who's your coach?
Greg Henderson.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
And what, I guess, like, what does your training look like from a, weekly layout perspective? And what are the things that you're focusing on? And I guess third part to the question is like, how much do you feel like you're sacrificing in terms of your training by having a full-time job?
So what I say is that you're typically sacrificing recovery instead of training. Because whereas like someone that doesn't have a full-time job, they're going to finish their training ride and they're going to like focus on getting a meal right away and like sitting in their recovery boots or taking a nap. When I finish my rides, usually I'm like, okay, I need to go jump into a meeting. And then like, depending on how that meeting goes, hopefully I'm eating within the hour. But sometimes like work gets crazy and I end up sitting in my chamois 2 hours later and I'm like, man, like I'm like texting my husband. I'm like, can you please make me lunch?
Yeah.
So it usually ends up being a sacrifice in terms of recovery. I still manage to train like 20 to 25 hours a week. That includes like cycling and strength training. And like what I work on with my coach is usually Mondays are like a full rest day or an easy day. And during the week, try to keep rides around like the 3-hour mark. Sometimes like I'm going into Unbound. So this is the biggest training month for me of the year. So of course we're going to have rides that are longer and I just kind of work with my boss around that. So they all know that I do this crazy race that's 200 miles and that this month is going to be a lot more time away for me. I think that's one of the best things about my job is just that like I have the flexibility to be able to say, I'm going to take this afternoon off and do a 5-hour ride on a Wednesday.
Can you elaborate a little bit on what it is that you do exactly for work?
Yeah, I'm a project manager. So I work for Mitsubishi Electric Automation and we build robot arms. So like factory automation. I work specifically on more like IT related projects. So most recently we redesigned our website. And so I was managing that project.
How excited are you about going to work and getting those projects done versus like just getting excited for your ride?
I'm definitely more excited about training and riding than I am about work. But at the same time, like work is really rewarding. And it's not so much that I love what I do, but I love the people that I get to work with. I started at this company in 2023 when they were going through a big implementation of their basically their like company operating system. It's called SAP. And through that, I just got to learn that like my boss and the other project managers are like, they're really good at what they do. And they're also just really good people. So I enjoy getting to be a part of a company where everyone is kind of like on their A game.
Sure. That's cool. It's like high performance mindset, in
is.
like business and sport. I like people like that. You've mentioned that there were 2 points in your career as a cyclist where you've had those little breaks from working full time. Do you foresee a third one coming? Maybe like if you, really have some great results and, bigger sponsorship contracts come in, do you see that as a potential avenue for you?
No, I don't foresee it, but I think that we're in a really uncertain economic environment right now, especially as a contractor. I'm very aware that like tariffs will impact our business. And if we've already had several rounds of layoffs and it's quite possible that the next time a round of layoffs comes up, my name would be on the chopping block. And if that were to happen, I don't know if I would look for something else right away, just because it's hard to find something with the flexibility that I'm asking for. And that's a huge sacrifice that I make to be able to train and race is like, I can't just take every job that I'm interested in that comes across the like LinkedIn requests. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I totally get that. Sponsor of today's episode is Lever Movement. This is a really cool product. It allows you to get some body weight support on any treadmill. You pretty much put this device on there, you put on a pair of shorts, and you use a cord to be able to take off up to 40 pounds of body weight. So many of you know I had Achilles tendon surgery recently, and I've been using the lever over the course of the last 40 runs to work up to the point where I was able to run an hour on land today. So that was a big milestone for me. Additionally, I've realized over the course of that process how important this could be for keeping me healthy and getting in some speed work without that pounding on the road. So I'm definitely going to be using the lever over the course of the next months and years as I continue to get back fit, healthy, and ready to race. So if you're interested in trying a lever for yourself, head on over to levermovement.com and use code EnduranceMatters20 for 20% off all devices. I want to definitely circle back a little bit more to like the specifics of the training and like the balance that you kind of need as a cyclist who's, focusing on gravel and mountain bike. So I guess like the first question that I have is how much of your training distribution goes on a gravel bike, a road bike versus a mountain bike?
Yeah, good question. So it depends on what race I have coming up. So when I'm like going into Leadville, for example, I'm almost 100% on my mountain bike. The mountain bike position is different than the gravel position. And I think that like as a triathlete, you know this best, you need to train on the bike that you're going to race on. I do still train on my road bike if there's a group ride. Like when we're in Tucson over the winter, I love to do the shootout. I have a lot of fun with that. So I spend more time on my road bike, kind of like through the winter months when really fast group rides are available. And then right now, since I'm going into Unbound, I'm almost predominantly on the gravel bike, but I'll still do probably one mountain bike ride a week just because I want to keep up those skills. They do like go away very quickly because I know that I'll be doing more mountain bike racing later on in the year.
Sure. How is the mountain biking and gravel riding in Tucson and Boulder? Are Tucson and Boulder the main places that you find yourself throughout the year?
Yes.
And so that's myself as well. I spent like the winter in Tucson and then, the summer months more or less here in Boulder. Like, are those amazing places across the board for gravel, mountain, and road? Because I know from a road perspective, both of them are amazing. Gravel, I know Boulder's amazing for gravel. Like, how is Tucson for gravel and how are both of them for mountain bike?
Tucson it's not as great for gravel. There is gravel riding. There's really cool gravel riding, but it is a little bit harder to get that in from within the city. That being said, I actually think a gravel bike is a really nice thing to ride on the roads in Tucson because, as you know, the roads are
100%. And the paths too. They're like great for the paths because it's a bit slower and those are like twisty and windy. There's like a million bike paths in Tucson.
Yes. But I actually find myself mountain biking a lot in Tucson because if you're familiar with like Gates Pass area, there's a lot of cool routes you can build where you're kind of like you're up around Gates Pass doing your efforts on the road, and then you can like add in single track to connect over to another road to do another effort. So I have a lot of fun with that. And I think the mountain biking in Tucson is just like it's totally different than Boulder because it's a lot of more like sharp rock and sand. But it's really fun in a different way. Like I almost enjoy mountain biking more in Tucson than I do in Boulder, which is probably weird.
How much of your training is focused on just like getting time and miles in versus like really specific intervals, sessions, that type of thing?
My coach has like some sort of efforts built into almost every workout. And that's not to say that like I'm doing like VO2 intervals every day. But I think that for him, there's always a goal of the workout, even if it's like, okay, you're doing a 2-hour zone 2 effort. For me, that's like, I'm going to find something where I can stay in that zone with minimal stops and minimal like deviations for 2 hours. So I do think that the training is very specific and does have like a very clear goal. And I don't find myself being someone that's like just putting the miles in. For me, it's like I'm doing the training and then if I'm done with training, I don't want to ride anymore because I'm trying to recover.
Sure. Do you have training partners and consistent training partners, or do you ride with your husband? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. So Starla Teddergreen, who's another off-road athlete in Boulder, she lives like a mile away from me. We train together, not every day, but like any day where our workouts align enough that we can. We train together. And then my husband and I don't ride together very often. Probably the only ride we do together is the shootout. We'll like roll to the start and then, usually not see each other again. So
That's the key to a happy marriage. My wife Jeannie and I, we swim together every day because swimming is
nice.
kind of like that, and we're kind of like similar-ish paces. But
Yep.
like cycling and running, which is just like it's better for our marriage to be able to just go do our thing and then come back.
Well, yeah, and like I'm sure that as athletes, and this is your like primary job, if you don't have that time apart, you're just always together.
100%. Yeah. I think it's really important to have that space, and we've both realized that like you need that, just whether it's social time with your friends or whether it's just like you need to put your headphones in and be in your own space for a while. Like that's really important. And so, anyways, we've learned that I think the hard way over many years of like trying to run together a lot and not going super well. Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, I'm curious to hear a little bit more about the hot topic in gravel right now and in triathlon is just like this, the fueling component. And I think that's something that you've spoken a little bit about on your social media. Like, how much are you practicing race fueling in training? How much are you experimenting with maybe pushing the limits of what like intra-workout fueling can look like? And how much of that is like, I guess, just on your mind?
Yeah. Well, I started working with the feed in 2021, and I feel really lucky to have worked with them that early on because they've been pushing the high carb fueling for a really long time. So it's actually something that I started doing before I feel like it was becoming really, really popular. And in fact, at the time when I started doing it, I started getting a lot of hate on social media from people that were like, you don't need 100 carbs an hour for a 5-hour zone 2 ride. And I was like, I beg to differ. Like, I think that the science says otherwise. And so it's been really cool to see that that's become more mainstream. And it's definitely something that I'm pushing the limits on, especially with like these longer events. I think that and as a bigger rider, I think that it shows, I think the science shows that there's really no limit. If our stomach can handle taking in more grams of carbohydrates per hour, there's going to be a benefit. So the like 50, like I love carbs fuel gels. They're like 50 grams of carbs per gel. And then the SAS beta fuel, like just using those instead of a like lower carbohydrate gel is really making it easy to start getting into like the 120, 150 grams of carbs per hour. So yeah, especially going into Unbound, it's something that I'm experimenting a lot with.
Yeah, I always explain that to athletes that, because I'm really tall, you're tall as well. Like I think if you're really tall, you probably have like a longer stomach lining. So therefore you can absorb and pull through more carbohydrate. Precision has like a 90-gram gel that sometimes I'll have like a whole 90 all at once, and they have these 60-gram bars. Like, yeah, everyone I think is like subscribing to this higher carbohydrate I guess protocol now. And I think it's not only impacting our ability to go faster. I think we're seeing a lot of people being able to push higher power and go longer. But I know at least for me, like in those instances where I'm similar to you, like, okay, I've come home from a ride, like I'm immediately jumping on a call, or I got to like, jump on my bike and get here or whatever for a podcast. Like if I'm doing, 150 grams an hour on a 3-hour ride, like I'm not destroyed. I can kind of get through. Yes. It buffers me for an hour. Whereas before 3 years ago, I'd be like doing 50 grams an hour and come home and just be like ghosted the rest of the day. Do you feel that way?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's like one of the things that, because Jake does some nutrition coaching with motocross athletes. And that's like one of the things that we both will repeat so often is like your training ride should not ruin your day.
Yeah.
Like if you're fueling properly, you should be able to go do other things. And it's so critical for people like you and I that have a busy life outside of training. You have to fuel because you're going to have things going on as soon as you finish that ride.
Yeah, 100%. Here in Boulder, like, are there the cycling culture, at least from my perspective, and I'm not like really immersed in the cycling culture with gravel cycling. You said your coach gives you very specific intention for the plan. Is there like a cafe culture, stop culture? I feel like looking at it from the outside, the cyclists love to like, go have a stop at the cafe, get a cake and a coffee, off they go again. Like, is it similar for you?
No, I rarely stop on rides, and sometimes I will, like, especially if I have an easy week where there isn't a lot of focus on the rides. It's more like just go have fun for a couple of hours. Then I'll definitely be looking for people to ride with and trying to stop. Starla and I, like my training partner, we typically don't stop on rides unless one of us has an issue that they need to address. But that's fine. Like, and I think that that's also a time factor for me. Like, usually I have 3 hours to do a 3-hour ride. One thing I do love about the shootout in Tucson and like that, like there's just such a cycling culture there in the winter. It does allow a little bit more for that like social riding.
Yeah.
And I think that I might be fairly unique in the gravel world. Like it seems just from what I see from my competitors on social media that they probably do spend more time like hanging out at coffee shops. Like Is King, for example, is a really good friend of mine, and she's riding. She's like super social. She's probably getting a coffee every time she rides. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like she's oftentimes stronger than I am in a race. So
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, I feel like I'll split the difference. Like half the time I'll have a stop. You know, for triathletes, it's kind of different in the sense of like we're not riding nearly the same. We're not riding 20 hours a week. But if I'm riding 15, like maybe 2 of those rides will have a stop, and the rest are just like 2 to 3 hours, no stops at all, intervals the whole time, make it happen. But I am a little bit envious of some of those athletes who make it seem on social media. And social media is never 100% reality. They're definitely out there working hard, and there's days where they're not stopping at the cafe. But that does seem like a pretty cool life to be able to like sit there for half an hour or an hour, on most rides and get that done. I am curious to hear your take on just the overall improvements in speed. We've touched on how difficult it is to really get up there in the Lifetime Grand Prix now. Like fueling's definitely a component of it. Is there anything else that you're observing and you're working on, whether it's equipment or training, to maybe take, a jump and maybe meet the demand of competition?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been working with Mark Graveline, who is an aerodynamic tester.
Sure.
And we've been able to kind of work on my setup to optimize it in terms of aerodynamics and rolling resistance. So that's something where we're finding a lot of sort of benefits that can be had. There are definitely other gravel cyclists that are doing the same thing. In fact, we kind of joke that like gravel is where triathlon was 10 years ago. So I think that we're going to see a lot more of this. But I think that's really where the speed advantages are coming from. Like Keegan doesn't talk about this a lot, but I know just, from being friends with his fiance that he does do a ton of testing, and he's always done that. So that's like his approach to how he is the athlete that he is not just like, oh, I go out and I train a lot and then I show up on race day. Like he's very scientific. And so I think that's where we're seeing a lot of the gains. And then it's such a new sport. Like it's new in the sense that for a lot of us, we haven't been doing like 12-hour events for a long time. So we are finding out like more every year about how to train the best for these. Like a few years ago when I was training for Unbound, it was pretty common for me to be doing like 8 or 9 hour rides leading into the event. And like now I've kind of figured out I don't really need to add that level of fatigue. I can do it with a 6-hour ride. And so I don't train more than 6 hours. And other people have different approaches, but like we're kind of figuring out what works for each of us.
Sure. If you have a 6-hour ride on your plan, what does that look like here in Boulder?
Well, for Unbound, I actually go east a lot. Which is kind of weird because most people go into the mountains. But Unbound is more hilly than mountainous. So it's like, I think it's a better stimulus to go out into the more like rolling hills, the flatter areas, and just practice like pedaling constantly for 6 hours.
Yeah. I had a Mark Allen on the podcast he was an Ironman world champion many, many years, and he would ride all the way out to Wiggins and back, which is Wiggins is like almost on the Kansas border.
Yeah.
And I did the ride once just for like, because you kind of have, like it's a legendary ride that like a lot of the old school guys would do. And like riding out there is a lot different than like riding up Left Hand Canyon to Ward and back. You know what I mean?
Super different.
Yeah, it's totally different world out there. I want to touch a little bit here on mindset. So like these gravel races and the mountain bike races, they're really long. Like even an Ironman, some people are doing 17-hour Ironmans. That's a really long time. But the professional athletes aren't racing much more than like 8 or 9 hours. And as you alluded to, like these can be 12-hour events. Like they're super long. What are you doing to like stay present in these long training sessions or in those long races?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I like oftentimes with training and with racing will use my fueling strategy to like help break it into digestible pieces. So like if I'm eating a gel every 30 minutes, I don't think about like, okay, I have a 6-hour ride. I'm like, okay, I just need to do this for the next 30 minutes and then I'll have another gel and then I kind of reset. And that has worked really well for me. And it's the same thing with racing. Like I'm definitely not doing that when the group is together. When the group is together, it's like you have to be so mentally engaged because you're trying to stay in a good position and you're also like trying to keep yourself safe with whatever dynamics are happening. But yeah, once the race kind of breaks up and you're into a smaller group, I'm like, okay, I'm going to eat another gel at this time. Or you're like thinking about the features that are coming up on the course because while it seems silly that you like start to know what is coming up on the Unbound course, I've raced it enough times now that I know like, okay, this section is going to be around 100 miles. And then from there, it's like pretty easy until this section. So for me, it's like it's breaking it up into small pieces.
Yeah, I kind of did that on the shootout a little bit. You're like, okay, I got to get to this bit, and then I got to get to Madeira, and then I got to get down the descent, this and that. So that's like my only exposure to cycling. But in the long distance triathlons, it's for the pros at least, like it's finding this balance between like your limit and also like meeting the demand of the competition. When you're approaching something like an Unbound, how much of it are you just saying, look, I know my parameters and I'm going to stick within those, or like I'm putting myself mentally in there no matter what, and whatever happens, happens?
Yeah. So this is where cycling is so different in that like I don't even look at my power when I'm in the group. Like I have the map pulled up and that's all I'm really focused on because I want to make sure I'm not like caught off guard by any turns that come up. But your like entire goal is to stay in that group as long as you can. And when the group breaks up, because it will, you want to be with the front of the group. But if that's not possible, each group on the road is going to be faster than the one behind them, usually. So it's just trying to stay as far forward as you can. And we will, of course, look at the power data from races so that I know what I'm training to be able to do. And of course, figuring out like for me, for the last 2 years, I was really lacking in like my top end power, which sounds crazy because you're doing these really long events. But when you're in the group, it's not that you're holding tempo for 5 hours. You're like pushing really hard to get up a steep climb. And then if you're in the group, you're recovering until the next one.
Sure.
So that's kind of been a big focus for me. And so I think that as I'm going into Unbound, like my entire goal is just to stay with the front of the group.
Yeah, that's interesting. How catastrophic are problems? Because in these gravel races, it seems like the issues are maybe getting less so with the tire technology and whatever, like you're seeing less flats and whatever. But let's say, for example, you drop a bottle, you drop a gel, you're cramping. Like how costly are those things in that long of an event? Or is there opportunity to recover and still succeed?
Yeah, I think there's opportunity to recover. Like Rosa, who won Unbound last year, flatted and caught back up to the group. So there's definitely opportunity. I think Rebecca Rush said that there will be good times and there will be bad times. Both are temporary, kind of relating to her experience with Unbound in Leadville. And it's really about problem solving. Like if you're starting to have stomach issues, it's kind of like asking yourself the critical questions of like, did I like take in one too many gels in the last hour, or like maybe I need to switch from drinking like a high carb mix to just water, like figuring out what you can do to address the problem. Then there are things that are unrecoverable. Like if your equipment breaks or something like that, you're done. But like you said, there's been so many advances recently that we're not seeing like race ending mechanicals on dry days.
Sure.
As much.
Yeah, interesting. I'm curious to hear your perspective on these races and maybe some of your training sessions and finding like a flow state. Do you find that often in training, and do you find it ever in races? Like I think about that all the time because I'll have some training sessions where I'm just like so immersed in the activity, and like those are the days that I live for, and I feel like races, sometimes they happen, sometimes they don't. Like, do you experience that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's not every day, but it's like most days that is where I find my flow state, is like when I'm training.
Yeah.
And like sometimes I'll even like I'll bring headphones to like listen to a podcast or something, but I don't even end up listening to it. It's just kind of like background noise, and I'm just like really in the moment, focused on what I'm doing. And I find that that's like, even if I'm not racing competitively in the future, that's something that I will always keep doing because I think it's so healthy for like our mental health and happiness as humans.
Yeah. That's probably the most important thing for me, honestly. Like the races are just like kind of the icing on the cake. And if you get 1 or 2 of those special days where you can be just like completely immersed for 8 hours, those are like the special ones. And so you always seek that in your training. And it's a really cool place if you can experience that. So you just got to keep working at it. Well, I really appreciate like all your transparency and all these questions here today. Before we wrap up, I've got some rapid fire questions.
Okay.
All right. Number 1, what's your go-to? I know you said you don't stop very often, but if you have to stop on a long ride at a gas station, what's the go-to order?
Gummy bears and Gatorade.
Okay, nice. What's the best road to ride on in Tucson and the best road to ride in Boulder?
Probably Mount Lemmon in Tucson. And I would have to say left hand in Boulder. Also with where I live, left hand is the most accessible.
Yeah, left hand's hard to beat. Grams of carbohydrate target per hour when racing?
120.
Solid. Camelback on the back for hydration or round bottles or both?
Bottles.
Favorite professional cycling race to watch as a spectator, like on TV or if you go to a race?
I still love watching criteriums. That's like any crit. Especially with the women's racing, that's where I get the most fired up.
Cool. And last one, what is a destination where there isn't a gravel or mountain bike race right now, but there should be one?
Man, I would love to see a gravel race like in Tucson. I don't know that there is one there, but I think that there could definitely be one in the off season that would be really popular. You know, there used to be the Mount Lemon gravel grinder that went up the backside of Lemon.
Yeah.
Doesn't exist anymore, but they should bring that back.
All right. I'm with you. Maybe you can promote it. Make it happen.
Ooh, not on my schedule right now.
Yeah. All right. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you. So good to have this conversation.
Awesome. We'll see you in another episode. Peace.